Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of On Attachment. In today's episode, we are doing 3 tips for avoidant attachers during conflict. So if you listened last week, I did sort of part 1 of this topic, which was 3 tips for anxiously attached people during conflict. And as promised, I'm coming back with part 2 this week, which is around avoidant attachment and some steps that avoidant attachers can take to shift the status quo in conflict in your relationships. As I spoke to last week, we all contribute to these patterns, even if we feel like it's really easy to blame the other person. And, if they didn't do their thing, I wouldn't do my thing. But that tends to be true on both sides. And that is good news because it means that we have more power over changing the patterns than maybe we realize. So today's episode is going to be sharing some pointers for avoidant people in conflict with your partner so that you can hopefully have more productive conversations where you can really hear each other and get to a resolution that is mutually satisfactory, quicker maybe than you tend to. I know that for avoidant attachers, one of the big gripes with their anxious partners is having conversations that go on for hours and hours and hours. And I know that can feel excruciatingly painful and can really feed into your resistance to talking about relationship stuff more broadly, because you feel like every time you open the can of worms, it's signing up for one of those big, drawn out, long, emotional conversations that are so taxing for you. So hopefully with these few tips today, you can short circuit some of that and maybe find a new way of doing things that allows both you and your partner to get what you need out of those conversations rather than swirling around in them endlessly. Before I dive into these 3 tips, a reminder in case you missed it last week, Healing Anxious Attachment, my signature program, is coming back in a few weeks' time. So if you are interested in joining the waitlist for that program, being on the waitlist simply gives you guaranteed access to exclusive early bird pricing, as well as being notified when doors open so that you can make sure that you don't miss out. We've had over 2,000 people in the program. It always gets really beautiful feedback. And if you are someone who struggles with anxious attachment and would like to work on becoming more secure, I would love to have you there. So please do check that out if you're interested. Jump on the wait list. And I hope to see as many of you there as possible. Okay, let's dive into this conversation around avoidant attachment and conflict. So as I did with anxious attachment, I will set the scene briefly. For avoidant attachers, I think it would be fair to say that conflict avoidance is the norm, and that can come from different places. As I alluded to in the introduction, that can come from a place of not wanting to have to embark upon those very long, painful conversations that can feel, I think they're draining for everyone, but they're particularly draining for the avoidant partner who, it is not their comfort zone to be talking about emotions for 3 hours, whether it's their emotions or someone else's, particularly when they feel like those conversations are just an opportunity for them to be dragged through the mud and told all of the ways that they are not good enough, not measuring up, disappointing their partner. That's a big ask for someone to sit through that. And so I think for avoidant attachers, there can be this sense of, let's just not talk about it. If we don't talk about it, then there's no problem. And they can be quite content with, leaving things unsaid, maybe sweeping things under the rug, because that feels much more peaceful and conducive to overall harmony than having those big conversations. Those conversations can just feel like, from the avoidant perspective, it's like, why would we possibly want to do that? It is such a burdensome thing to have to do, to sit through those conversations. Whereas for the anxious partner, we absolutely must have those conversations, because if we don't have those conversations, it's all I can think about. Whereas for the avoidant partner, it's like, it's the last thing I want to think about, all of those issues in our relationship. So I just compartmentalize and carry on with my life quite happily. So again, neither is better or worse. It's just totally different approaches to conflict. And that's why it's so important to, foster and cultivate more understanding and awareness of the ways in which our partner might be different to us, because then we can depersonalize it a bit and realize that, they're not out to get us. They're actually just out to protect themselves. And this goes for most everyone. Okay. So for avoidant attachers, there can be this commitment to keeping the peace and harmony, as well as avoiding those sorts of conversations which really do detract from their overall sense of the relationship being worthwhile. I think that while anxiously attached people will happily have those conversations and have those sorts of conflicts and not then think that there's anything wrong with the relationship, for avoidant attachers, it can really wear them down quite quickly and can make them feel like, this shouldn't be happening. In a good relationship, we wouldn't be having these fights. And so it can really, detract from their overall satisfaction with the relationship. So here are my tips for avoidant attachers during conflict. The first one is really simple, but it almost feels like a hack because I think it is that simple but that effective. And it is, if you don't know what to say, which will often happen for avoidant attachers because you tend to slow down during conflict. You tend to go blank, go numb. You might feel like your partner's just talking at you and you've totally dissociated from your body. You can't even hear them. They're speaking for 5 minutes straight and you can't actually remember what they've said. And so you just kind of sit there staring into your hands or staring at the wall, and you could feel their frustration and irritation mounting, and then they might get, even more kind of attacking at you and say, well, aren't you going to say something? You're just sitting there. I just said all of this stuff and you don't even have anything to say. Don't you care at all? Those sorts of, escalations, which can feel just like a lot of pressure when you're already, really struggling and really stressed. Just say, I'm having a really hard time finding the words. I hear you, but I'm really struggling to gather my thoughts or to know what to say. That is 1 million times better than saying nothing, I promise. And I say this as someone who leans more anxious, that if my partner says, I hear you, but I'm struggling to find the words right now to articulate myself, that is so much better than him saying nothing. And that allows me to know that I've been heard and to feel validated and understood, but also it allows me to access compassion and empathy for the fact that, he's having a hard time. When he just sits there silently, and to be fair, he doesn't do this very often, but if he just sits there silently, it's really easy for me to have an internal narrative that he, isn't listening, doesn't care, isn't engaging, isn't putting in effort, just from that very fear-driven, self-protective place. But as soon as he's able to articulate what's going on for him, narrating that inner experience of I'm feeling really numb, I'm having a hard time finding the words, immediately I can go, oh, okay, I know this person, I know they care, I know they're doing their best, and I don't have to feel so defensive. And I'm sure that applies for many people. So saying what you're feeling, even if it's I don't know what to say, or I'm feeling numb, or I'm feeling defensive, those things are so much better than saying nothing. Okay, the next one is, and this is a big ask and it's really hard, but try to hear through your partner's complaint to the desire that sits underneath, or to the emotion that sits underneath. So if you have a more anxious leaning partner, as you typically will if you are more avoidant, your partner probably comes at you in conflict with what sounds like a long list of complaints of things that you aren't doing right or that you need to do differently. And it's very easy and understandable that you would sit there and switch off or become very defensive in response to that, that you might want to argue with their analysis of you and point out all the ways in which they are wrong or you don't agree. But that will only lead them to feel invalidated and escalate and take your fighting back as proof that you don't really care about them, and so on and so forth. Whereas if you're able to say, it sounds like you've been feeling a bit lonely, when they're saying you never spend time with me and you don't even prioritize me, if you can find it within yourself to peel back the top layer, which is coming through as a complaint or a criticism or an attack, and go, what's the feeling under here? What are they needing from me? What's like the tenderness? What's the hurt? And can I speak to that? Can I respond to that rather than the actual words that they've said? Because I promise you, if you're able to say, I'm so sorry, it sounds like you've really been missing spending time together, or I hear you, I'm hearing that you're feeling neglected or lonely, or it sounds like it's hard for you when I'm, not communicative. I'm really sorry, I'll try and do better. It's almost like you're just taking a pin and popping the balloon and it's all just going to deflate all of that tension in your partner, because really what they're doing, and undeniably they could be more skillful about it, right? Anxious partners can be really almost aggressive in the way that they approach this, and that is not helpful. I will be the first to admit that it's not productive. But if you can find it within yourself to look through underneath to the tender part of whatever it is they're trying to say, it will just stop the whole argument in its tracks, I promise. And that will really allow them to feel so seen and held, which is all they really want, right? In all of those big, long conversations, I promise all they want is to feel validated and cared for. And so if you can find a way to say, I see you, it makes sense why you're feeling the way you're feeling. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere and I care about what you have to say. It's just like the whole thing will melt and you'll be back into connection. They'll let go of all of that anger and frustration that they're coming at you with, and you'll be able to find your way to a much more constructive solution much more quickly. So try and see through the complaint to whatever the hurt or the pain is underneath. And if you can wrap that in some love and care, then you're going to be having a whole different conversation with a whole different version of your partner. Okay. And the third one is, and this is really one for you in terms of supporting yourself, don't be afraid to ask for a timeout or some space if you need it. So it's really not worthwhile to persist in conflict if you are feeling really dysregulated, if you are like totally numbed out, if you are very angry and defensive, if you notice those sorts of responses coming up and you are just so entrenched in seeing your partner as the bad guy and as the enemy, and you feel like a lot of anger or frustration, defensiveness towards them, there's no point in just persevering. And this is true on both sides. This is a tip for anxious people as well. There is no point persevering once you reach a certain point of dysregulation, because you are not hearing each other. All you're seeing is like red, right? Both of you, it's just in total threat mode, and you are just in attack, defend, fight, flight. It is not productive to have a conversation from that place. Your empathy is offline, your rationality is offline, you're both in this very tunnel visioned place. So don't just push through thinking that, if you stay in it long enough, you're going to find your way to a resolution. You almost certainly won't. You'll just end up hurting each other and walking away from it feeling really depleted and disconnected. So don't be afraid to ask for a timeout if you need one. And, the helpful thing, and I've given this advice many times before, if you are more avoidant, say, look, I think we should take a timeout. I notice that I'm getting really defensive. I don't think this is going to be very constructive right now. Can we come back to this in 2 hours or whatever? But ask for the timeout and serve up the reassurance of, I'm not just trying to escape. I'm not just trying to get out of the conversation altogether, because if there's any sense of that, your partner's going to protest against the timeout. But if you can say, I need some space and I do want to hear what you have to say. I just don't think I can right now. I don't think I have the capacity right now. And really frame it in a way that I'm asking for this timeout so that I can better hear you, because this is important to me and I do care, rather than I just need space because you're too much and I don't want to deal with this right now, which is not going to land very well. So don't be afraid to ask for the timeout if you need, but serve up the, when and where we're going to come back to this, and follow through on that, okay? Don't just wait until they raise it, or don't try and get out of it somehow. Be respectful of what you've said and of them by coming back to the conversation when you said you would. Okay, so those were the 3 tips for avoidant attachers on better conflict. I hope that that's been helpful, both for those avoidant folks who are listening, but also for their anxious partners. Maybe you can listen to this together or share it with your partner. If you've enjoyed this episode, so grateful for those of you who do leave reviews and ratings on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. For anyone who wants to watch rather than listen, a reminder that these are all uploaded to YouTube. And if you want to go and like and subscribe there, that is hugely helpful, as I am trying to build a YouTube channel. It's very humbling to start from scratch on a new platform. But yes, thank you for all of your support, and I hope to see you again next week. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining me for this episode of On Attachment. If you want to go deeper on all things attachment, love, and relationships, you can find me on Instagram at Stephanie__Rigg or at stephanierigg.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, I'd be so grateful if you could leave a review and a 5-star rating. It really does help so much. Thanks again for being here, and I hope to see you again soon.